which is from Cy Davis. Thank you. Mr Davis, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you to all the representatives responsible for the people and the safety of people in this city now and for all future generations. Achieving a real net zero is going to be one of the most difficult things that you're going to do. And 3% of what was required just shows how difficult that is. How things stand, it's looking impossible. And we're wanting assurance that there is a viable strategy in place to move forwards quicker. 50% of all historical emissions have occurred within my lifetime. If growth at 3% a year, which is the rate which economies like to aim for, occurs, those emissions will be doubled again by 2050. They will be doubled again by 2075. That leaves an 8-fold increase in emissions, in the amount of energy required, in the amount of resources required, in the amount of pollution that is dumped upon the biosphere. So there can be no logical argument to counter the claim that infinite growth on a finite planet is impossible. Absolute decoupling, the prerequisite for net zero to be obtainable, needs to be seen in that context. And there's no evidence to suggest that it is obtainable, and certainly not within the time framework, and definitely not with respect to the available resources. So now seems the time for committed and responsible people to devote time and resources to the exploration of alternative models of economic development. To avoid this is to avoid preparation for future shocks. Now, that was the preamble to what is my question to you. So in this context, would the Council outline the scientific and economic assumptions with evidence to support those assumptions that are being made to suggest that there can be an absolute decoupling of the city's emissions from the city's gross domestic product? And further, could the Council clarify whether it considers that Council commitments to both citizens, particularly our most vulnerable citizens, and to the environment is possible without sustained levels of economic growth in the region that I suggested of 3%. And if the Council is unable to provide reliable evidence that net zero can be achieved with the planned economic growth, and given the political sensitivity of considering alternative economic models, would the Council consider investment of a relatively small amount of money to support an independent summit to consider how a post-growth or degrowth or donut or steady state economy, whatever language you want to use, could be developed in Sheffield along the lines of the 2023 European Union's Beyond Growth Conference. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Ben Miskell to respond.
Thank you for your question. It is through clean economic growth that we create the shared wealth needed to tackle the climate emergency. And whilst you may respectfully disagree with me, it's important to say that I am pro-growth. Growing our economy locally means that we have more money in the municipal coffers to be able to fund projects to tackle poverty and injustice, and brings about more jobs to our city. We are, of course, living with the fallout of the reckless economic policies of Liz Truss, which has hurt people in this city economically and made the job that we have to tackle the climate emergency even more challenging. That's why we should welcome Labour's Green Prosperity Plan and a Labour government which will seek to sustain the highest growth in the G7. They may not like
Just
it,
a moment,
but we will have a general election coming along.
Ben, just be cognizant of what was said before.
Of course, Lord Mayor. And I think it's important to say that this is a plan that I support and a plan that will deliver for the people of Sheffield. And whilst we appreciate that you coming here today, it's important to say that we would not consider hosting or supporting a conference that was anti-growth. Sheffield, of course, is a city on the up, and that involves punching in line with and above our weight. A city that is unashamedly pro-growth, pro-jobs, pro-lifting people out of poverty, attracting the sustainable industries of the future and tackling the climate emergency.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to the next question now.